Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Week 15 edition of the Football Diehards DFS show. I am joined, as always, by my incredible co-host, Eric Romoff at Fantasy Nav. I am Jamie Calandro at JAC3600. We're actually in the midst of a Saturday slate of football, one of the best things for the end of the year. And Eric, what about that first game with Minnesota and Indianapolis, the Vikings, the biggest comeback in NFL history? Did you give up on that game and come back to it like I did?
So I rode true all the way through. I had the radio feed playing in my ear while I was doing some housework, wrapping some Christmas presents, doing a little bit of Christmas shopping. So I was there the whole time, but I'd be lying if I said that my interest didn't start to dwindle around that midway point.
Yeah, I gave up. We were at halftime. We started doing some Christmas stuff around the house, and we watched I think the remainder of one of the Christmas movies that we had been watching earlier that day. And then I kind of saw as it was going on that they were within one score, and I said, "All right, I'm going to put the last 3 minutes on," and it proved to be the classic that it was. So fun stuff. Did you play any DFS today?
I did, yeah. I fired at the 3 game main slate for Saturday, and then I had a bunch of showdown builds in there. I was the weirdo that stacked up the Buffalo Miami game under the pretense that it would be clinically under rostered. So
Mm-hmm.
so far that part of the prophecy has come true. We'll see if they can hold up their end of the bargain on the scoring front.
Yeah. I was looking into that myself. I pulled the trigger on one, but there was Jonathan Taylor kind of killed all GPP teams. I should be pretty good. I did play cash. I usually don't play cash on these small slates, but I did, and I had Jefferson and I had Cousins stacked together, and Dobbins and Peoples Jones in that game. So all I got left is Knox and the Bills defense, and so far I'm looking pretty good to hit on the double ups there. But you
Nice.
guys didn't join us to talk about today. You joined us to talk about tomorrow, where we have another 10-game slate to cover. Some fun ones. Playoff pictures are starting to take shape. We're starting to get into that territory where value plays that sometimes we've never heard of until like week 10 of the year start to become relevant because of teams shutting down their players or anything like that. So we're going to get into it. A little bit of housekeeping again before we get going. If you're joining us live here, thank you. First of all, feel free. We're live on YouTube, so feel free to post your questions in the chat there. We will get to every single one of them. 99% sure of that. We only got 10 games to discuss today, so we should be able to get to your questions. So don't be shy. They can be DFS related, season long related. If you're season long, you're probably in the playoffs right now, so congratulations. We'll do our best to help you. So, Eric, you ready to get down to the brass tacks here, as they say, and try and build a DFS lineup? I'll say first of all, I built one. I always build one on Wednesday or Thursday, kind of as my initial one. And I was loving it. And right now, it's probably going to be exceedingly different from what I was looking at for that one right now, just based on some stuff that's been going on here. But we'll get into it. Are you that way too? Do you build an early lineup and kind of build from there?
Not an entire lineup. I'll usually take a first look, kind of that Wednesday Thursday time frame, as I'm assuming what happened with your initial lineup. Usually, there's some injury and availability news that inevitably comes in and changes the landscape of that build. So usually, I want to take kind of a first pass at the player pool and just see who immediately jumps off the page and put a couple of asterisks next to them on my notes, but don't go quite as far as building out a full roster.
Yeah, there's ways to do it. I've always kind of tried to not do that because I feel like I'm gonna get too married to some players and kind of not have the discipline to be able to do the pivots that I really should be doing. But I've found that as I've played more and more years, I've been okay with that. So I do like kind of building right now and seeing where I'm at. As far as building goes this week, I'm in a position, and we'll talk about this in the first game here. I'm in a position where I usually like to find myself getting as much value out of the quarterback position on DraftKings as possible. But this week, I am finding myself paying up. for the position. I don't know who it's going to be yet, but with value at running back and wide receiver, and no real ones that I'm in love with at quarterback, outside of maybe like Brady or something along those lines, or if you trust Zach Wilson against that Detroit defense, I'm paying up at quarterback this week. And the first one that, of course, is at the top of the list is Jalen Hurts. So let's get into the Eagles and Bears. Eagles are 9-point favorites in Chicago. They've averaged 41 points per game over their last three. So, I mean, there's really no reason why the Eagles are going to slow down right now. The Bears have given up 21 rushing touchdowns so far this season, which is incredible. I mean, we talk about, the Texans and the Browns and the Chargers are always the rush defense that we target, but I mean, the Bears defense, 21 rushing touchdowns, not to mention 4.8 yards per carry. So, I mean, let's talk about Hurts first and foremost. He's averaging 25 points per game. I'm sorry. I'm looking at the wrong stat. He's averaging more than that, isn't he? He's averaging, I lost it here in my things, of course. So 27.1 fantasy points per game. So is he someone at 8,200 as the most expensive quarterback you're comfortable pony up that money for, or are you looking at somebody cheaper at the quarterback position?
Yeah, I mean, I've said it a few times on this show now, right? Like, there is always going to be a merited argument for Jalen Hurts being a cash game lock and being in the player pool from a DFS standpoint. I think your overall sentiment about paying up at the position is spot on this week. I'm not sure if I quite want to go all the way up to Jalen Hurts, but he's certainly a very strong play, right? I think I'm going to look to save a little bit of money at the position, but he'll be one of a very short list of players that will be in the QB pool for me.
Yeah, so when you say a little bit of money, I'm curious as to wonder, you know what, I'm not even going to beat around the bush because I'll probably forget before we get to that game. Is Justin Herbert that guy that you're looking at a little bit of money off of Hurts? Because he's the other one that I'm loving at the quarterback position right now.
Yeah, Justin Herbert's definitely in the mix there. I'm kind of toying around with Justin Fields on the other side of this game, largely based on rostership and his rushing ability. Taking a little bit of a look at Dak Prescott, Joe Burrow, maybe getting cute with Trevor Lawrence, but overwhelmingly it's going to be Hurts, it's going to be Herbert, and then probably a sprinkling of one of those kind of 3 or 4 guys I mentioned there at the back end.
I like it. And right now, like I said, I still got that placeholder set. I won't really break it apart until tomorrow when I do my final builds. But Hertz was in my place, my initial lineup. So I don't know if some of these changes are going to get me off of that. They might not. I'm okay if I wind up going with him. But I did mention also, how bad the Bears' rushing defense is on the ground. I think, you got to consider Miles Sanders as a legitimate RB1 upside play in GPP. People are still soured on him. He never seems to get the rostership that you want him to. So I'll say this, and you can elaborate as much as you want. But if you're using the Eagles, who you have to give a look to in GPP with a team total of 29, and like I said, 41 points per game over their last 3. How are you approaching it? Are you doing like a Hurts passing stack, or running Hurts kind of with nobody, and then maybe running Sanders with nobody and other ones, with the Eagles defense or something like that? What's your path to this team?
Yeah, I'm probably not running Hurts out there naked. It's also part of the reason why I have some uncertainty in my answer about Fields as well, right? Like, their best path to value is by themselves, but it's really hard to get those force multipliers that I'm looking for in a tournament context. So where I have Hurts, maybe taking a look at him with Sanders, moreover them, the interest for a stacking partner is AJ Brown, right? He has been absolutely setting the world on fire over the last handful of weeks. This week he'll see predominantly rookie coverage, Jalen Johns, who's allowing better than a 70% catch rate. So Brown is in another fantastic spot from a matchup standpoint. Makes makes for a very intriguing running mate to go along with Hurts, but also gets very expensive very, very quickly, right? AJ Brown is 8K himself. So, another player where, stacking those two up will probably not be the most popular combination, but you're going to have to get really thrifty with the rest of your build.
Yeah, and I always feel like we're talking about that problem with this, and it's a good thing to kind of break down because even today, if you wanted, you mentioned you have your favorite stack was today, and it was the under rostered Bills Dolphins game that's going on right now. But I mean, that's not cheap. I'm assuming if you had Alan Diggs and you picked up Dolphins wide receiver, you had to get pretty creative. So who were some of the pieces that you kind of messed around with there?
For the Saturday slate?
Yeah.
So I've got a couple builds out there with KJ Osborne, which went very nicely.
Oh, wow. Nice call there.
Basically, rotating across Osborne and Alec Pierce is where I was going for salary relief. So have a handful that are looking fantastic, have a handful that are looking pretty much dead and buried, but such is life in this tournament game, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, in the tournament game, I mean, you're not trying to squeak in really for that. I mean, it's nice when your tournament team cashes, but you're trying to win, and if you're not winning, you're losing. So, it's the Talladega Nights. If you're not first, you're last. That's the GPP mantra. So yeah, I like that play too. So, what about on the Bears side? You mentioned Justin Fields is in your quarterback pool. Who would you play him with though? We've got Claypool is out for this one. So, I mean, you got some kind of wide receiver 3s and 4s locking up with Darius Slay and James Bradbury. So, I mean, is it Cole Kmet? 90% of the team's snaps. That's 11 straight games now. He's had a 90% snap share. So, I mean, and we've talked about the Eagles defense kind of being a funnel to the middle like that. So, Fields and Kmet, I think, is pretty good if you are looking at Fields. Is there anyone else there that you're playing with Fields? Is it just those two?
Yeah, it's really those two, right? And the more we talk through it, the more that it's becoming apparent that I'll probably look at this game more as a skinny stack type of consideration, right? Kind of build around a different game and then do a Brown and a Kmet or Sanders and a Kmet, where you're getting a little bit of that correlation, but you're not so heavily invested. The issue with the Bears is they have some very pedestrian guys running routes out there against a very difficult secondary, right? So basically, if you're stacking this game on the Chicago side, you're really painted into a corner with that Fields and Kmet combo, and it's hard to beat large fields when you've got that percentage of your builds sort of locked in there.
Yeah, I agree. It's tricky. It's tricky for sure. What about David Montgomery? He's very much a concern for me today. I don't think I'm going to have him at all. And in the season-long leagues, I would definitely, he's got a feature back role for sure. They have Khalil Herbert is still out for at least one more game. But I mean, this Philadelphia front, since they've upgraded it, the last 2 games, Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley have combined for 58 yards against them. So I don't know. I don't know if I could play Montgomery in any capacity in this one, especially with a negative game script. What about you?
Yeah, it's going to be hard to feel confident about Montgomery, right? Your analysis is spot on, right? Since they've brought in Sue, over these last 2 weeks, Philadelphia has gotten markedly more difficult against the run. I think a couple of things that are working a little bit different than the circumstance of Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley, who are categorically better runners than David Montgomery. Let's make no bones about it. Yeah. But also having Justin Fields out there to really draw a lot of defensive attention, I do think works in Montgomery's favor a little bit more. Right, Tannehill and Daniel Jones are not going to draw that type of defensive attention. And you look at it, and Philadelphia is a somewhat favorable matchup to running backs catching passes out of the backfield. You see David Montgomery, routinely getting you know, 4 or 5 targets over his last handful of games. So, you know, there are ways that he can get there, but it certainly doesn't set up like this is going to be his ceiling game by any means. But
Yeah,
safe enough volume floor if we're talking kind of season long context.
yeah, I think that's definitely in the DFS context. I just don't see that GPP ceiling for him, and then the
Yeah.
rostership isn't there for cash either. You know, I mean, there's other running backs in that price range that you want way more. So I think we're in lockstep there. All right, moving on. Again, you know, if you have any questions, we got a lot more people listening to us now. So thank you again. Bring the questions in the chat. We'll get to them as we go along here. But the next game on our list is Atlanta at New Orleans. The headline here is Desmond Ridder taking over for Marcus Mariota. And Ridder, you know, I mean, you can't call him a cash play because he's never taken an NFL snap yet, and you just can't do that in cash despite the price tag. But you more of a GPP player than me. I'll kind of let you take the lead on this one. You didn't mention him when you were talking about your quarterback pool early, but I'll paint the picture for you. Preseason, 7.7 yards per attempt, 3 passing touchdowns, rushed for 58 yards. He played a lot in the preseason, so we did get to see him. Preseason is preseason, of course, but he doesn't have Kyle Pitts. Don't even know if that matters for this matchup here. The Falcons have a team total of 19.5. So, any Ridder for you or no?
Probably not. We're talking about a rookie quarterback prospect that fell certainly further than a lot of people were chatting him up. Was technically the second QB off the board, but not exactly an early first round draft capital, and that introduces uncertainty and question marks. You couple that with the same that can be said about the play calling and the coaching for the Falcons this year under Arthur Smith. There's just not a whole lot that would give me confidence to get out there and roster Ridder. And I mean, I think he's going to be a little bit popular, right? Given the price tag specifically. So, certainly a player that I'm not trying to get a ton of exposure to. I think his upside's fairly limited. From a fantasy standpoint, the matchup against New Orleans is average, right? Slightly above average, but they're not giving up a ton of passing yards, right? They're bottom third in passing yards on the season. Maybe he's incrementally better than Marcus Mariota, but I just don't think he's the type of prospect that is going to come into his first game and set the world on fire. So he'll be on the sidelines for me in my tournament builds.
Me as well, and I think I'll even take that a step further. If we do see rostership from Ridder, I think that's a nice spot to use the Saints defense in GPP just as some, just immediate leverage off of that. Sometimes you do it as the running game. I think you can just take the Saints D in that one too, because he is a rookie playing his first game in the hostile environment. Well, I mean, it's a dome, so it's friendly for that this time of year, but it's still, he's on the road in New Orleans. Technically, everyone is still alive in the NFC South. I mean, the Falcons are second, so you never know how these teams are going to play this year. Anyone else on Atlanta? I mean, the only one that really pops out to me is Drake London, who has 16 targets in the 2 games since Pitts went down, but he and Ridder have never played together. You recall London missed the entire preseason. So they have never played a snap together. Do you have London anywhere? Is he cheap enough?
I think he is cheap enough. I'm not gonna go out of my way to try to fit Drake London in, but the rookie season that has been for Drake London has been fairly impressive. It's really just been a volume consideration that sort of kept him hampered. I don't think that Desmond Ridder coming in means that all of a sudden they're going to start throwing the ball 50 times a game. But if he throws even a comparable amount of passes, maybe a slight uptick there, to get the 4.7K for Drake London, there are ways that he can get there. And this is a slate where I'm finding salary relief as being a little bit hard to come by. So, if there's a position where I've got someone maybe in the mid 5Ks and I need to save a couple $100 to get to a different player, Drake might be a pretty common swap for me. But like I said off the top, he's not someone that I'm prioritizing for his own right.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. He's kind of strikes me as one of those last player fits. I'm fine with it. Or like you said, if you need that couple of $100 and he's the way, I'm okay with that too. But not someone that I'm building around. So I think we're good there. The other side, the Saints, a little bit of a higher total for them than we're used to the last few games, and that's an indictment of the Falcons defense. We're looking at a 24, which is good but not great. Andy Dalton is still in there, even though the Saints have lost 4 out of their last 5. I don't think you can ever play him anymore, though, because he is a constant risk of in-game benching. It's not like he's doing anything to make you want to play him anyway. But Alvin Kamara is someone I'm very interested in this one. I know it's been a very disappointing season. He had 59% snap share against Tampa Bay in Week 13, which was a season low. But Mark Ingram is out after he had an MCL injury to end the game. He's out for the year. So this looks like a good rebound spot for Kamara. 6,800 is as cheap as he's been since Week 6. My biggest issue with him is, and I guess rostership may tell the tale here, is if I'm comfortable playing him in cash. Right now he's in there, but he has had a disappointing season. And Dalton under center has not really helped him. So what's your lean on Kamara? Right now he's showing pretty high rostership, which makes him kind of a cash, not GPP play for me, but maybe you have a different perspective on that.
No, I've got a similar line. My lean right now is trying to find a way to be underweight to Alvin Kamara. I'm seeing him pushing around 20 to 23%. That's probably a little too rich, but the thing that really shines through is the 6.8K price tag. This is a player that we've been happy to pay well into the 8Ks, pushing 9Ks at points in the not too distant past. So to get him sub 7, he's going to be on the radar. Even last week where he saw that season low snap share, right? Like he was still pushing a dozen carries, his highest total since week 9. Tied it in week 11. So he should be out there more with Ingram out. Even if he's not, when he's out there, he's still a priority to get the ball in his hands. I think your read on Andy Dalton is spot on, right? He could get the old hook at any given point. So, if he does, maybe that brings Winston back in and introduces a bit more life to this offense overall. But even without it, right, 6.8K for a guy that is going to see the vast majority of carries out of this backfield, should see a good number of targets. Just feels like he's got a lot of ways to pay off that number.
Yeah, so he's probably going to make the final cut here unless some things happen as we go. I just like the opportunity and the expected workload here. They have David Johnson, who I honestly didn't know was still in the league, behind him, and it looks like they picked up Eno Benjamin, but last I read he wasn't expected to be active. So it's David Johnson and Dwayne Washington behind Kamara. So I think that really bodes well for him, his floor. What about the passing game? Are you interested in anyone outside Chris Olave, and how interested are you in Olave?
Not necessarily interested in either. Olave is certainly the most interesting piece in terms of pass catchers for the Saints. His price tag is fine. I would like him more in kind of that low 6K range or even 6 flat. The issue with Olave is that there was a window there where Atlanta's secondary was super banged up and everyone was just able to throw around the yard on them. That's not exactly the case anymore, mainly with AJ Terrell coming back. So Olave is going to have a tough matchup out there on a good percentage of his snaps. And we've already kind of bemoaned the state of the Saints offense with Andy Dalton under center, right? So, not someone that I'm going to go out of my way to fit into my builds overall. he can get there, but the pricing is just kind of in a weird zone too. Jamie, I think I lost you there.
That's because I blew my nose and I just said all that while I was on mute while you were talking. Sorry about that, everybody. I don't remember where I left off, but I agree with you on Olave here. So we're going to move on to the Lions and Jets, which is actually, before we do that, we have a question in the chat here from Robert Ferenc, one of our regular guests who has a Lions emoji as his, or a Lions icon as his thing. Hey, Robert, thanks. So we'll talk about your Lions in a second, but he says, you mentioned value on the slate. Is this a slate to pay down at running back and more for wide receiver, or pay up for running back using FanDuel? I mean, we'll get to, I think the best answer for that is we'll cover all the value plays in either game and kind of see as, you know, what stands out to you as a build. FanDuel is a little bit different to me though, than DraftKings with the less dynamic pricing. Honestly, the quick answer is there are paths to do both here. I mean, we've got value wide receivers in the Patriots game, in the Houston game, and there's value running backs on the Patriots side as well too. Right now, I think you know, if you want me to answer that question plainly, I'd say pay down at wide receiver and up at running back. But you know, there's paths to both. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard to have kind of a hard and fast position on this. You know, taking a look at the slate right now, it seems like, you know, whatever, 5 of the 7 most popular running backs are all in that top tier price range. So, you know, that's typically an indication for me to, you know, pay down and try to get different, you know, and get leverage on those higher tiered players. You know, there's not a ton of awesome value at the running back position, so might end up shaping up to be a bit more of a mid tier type of line when it's all said and done. But for me, you know, projected rostership is really the first thing I look at. So with these guys being popular, I would err on paying up elsewhere than the running back position.
Yep. But that's good. I mean, it is good to look at the slate as a whole, and FanDuel. Keep in mind, FanDuel is run differently here, just because of how they kind of go about their pricing scheme and the lack of bonuses and whatnot too. So I'm glad you specified that as well. Keep the questions coming. We're going to segue from Robert's favorite team into the Lions and the Jets. This is an interesting one on both counts. So I'm going to start with Detroit here because I'm curious as to your thoughts here. For first of all, the running game. The running game is gross now for Detroit. I don't really know what to make of it here, and I'm staying away from it. Last week, Jamal Williams, 26 snaps. DeAndre Swift, 25 snaps. Justin Jackson, 20 snaps. He has been downgraded to questionable, so maybe that looks Jackson. That is, maybe that looks a little bit more promising. But again, this isn't even a good matchup against the Jets defense for the running game. So I'm largely off them. The one I want to talk to you about on the Detroit side is Amon-Ra St. Brown, who I have played in cash every week since week 10. And I tweeted about this earlier in the week. This is going to be the first time since then that I don't. I do think that his slot usage should keep him away from their perimeter corners, Gardner and Reed, but not the whole time. So I'm avoiding him in cash. I don't think he's a good per dollar play. When there are others around him I like better and cheaper ones that I could play and pay up at running back, kind of alluding to that question. Where are you on St. Brown and GPP? Because I think he's an important player to discuss.
Yeah, so we get to kind of take the opposite positions on St. Brown, right? He's always in the player pool, but he's just, his volume is such to where he's almost a cash game lock every single week. This week I'm kind of following a similar line. I think he offers a bit more of an interesting path in the tournament context, right? everyone out there that's been paying any modicum of attention to NFL football this year knows that the Jets secondary is a buzzsaw. So I think we're going to see. I mean, I'm seeing him push around 9% rostership. I think that number is going to fall even further, and that's an opportunity that I absolutely want to take advantage of. You mentioned the matchup that he'll see against Michael Carter II. Michael Carter II lines up his pre-snap alignment is 93% covering the slot. So we're going to see the overwhelming majority of St. Brown's routes being run in Carter's coverage. Carter's allowing almost a 70% catch rate. Certainly far more favorable position to be in than against Sauce Gardner or DJ Reed. So if we're going to continue to see St. Brown be kind of an afterthought from a rostership standpoint, that's a position that I want to try to attack.
Yeah, I figured you were going to say that too, and that's going to talk me into playing him in GPPs for sure. I'm going to take that hardline approach that he is not a cash play this week, especially with, as you mentioned, the plummeting rostership percentage here. Speaking of which, the other elephant in the room in this game on the other side of the ball, Garrett Wilson. I want to talk about him as well. Garrett Wilson was pretty much wheels up, with Mike White as quarterback. The differential between his targets and his air yards and his fantasy points per game with White as opposed to Zach Wilson was significant. So I currently have Garrett Wilson in that early cash build that I made. At $6,000, I viewed him as, again, really underpriced. But he does have significantly worse stats than with Zach Wilson than he does with anyone else but Zach Wilson. So he's one that I'm going to play to the very end. I'm most likely going to get off him in cash, kind of for similar reasons here. Not so much the matchup, but the lack of play. But, we have to look at this, that the fact that Detroit is, even though they've improved defensively recently, they're still a bad pass defense. They've allowed the most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, the fourth to wide receivers. What's your stance on Garrett Wilson in this game?
Yeah, I mean, Garrett Wilson was just the chalk of all chalk heading into the week. Now, not so much. If his rostership continues to fall, I might have a little bit of interest, right? Your characterization is spot on, right? Wilson's biggest weeks have come when Zach Wilson was not on the field, but he did have some decent outings out there, right? He had back-to-back, 17, almost 18-point performances in week 8 and week 9 with Zach Wilson under center. So, I don't think that he should be left for dead, and it seems like that's kind of how the marketplace is responding to him. So if this trend holds, I might find my way into a few more Garrett Wilson shares than I anticipated. The biggest point of frustration for me, it felt like this was going to be the point where we could really get some Elijah Moore sneaking into the backside of these builds. That confidence is now entirely shot given just how horrific the cadence and rapport was between Zach Wilson and Elijah Moore. But yep. the overarching theme for this Jets offense is when Zach Wilson's out there, they hide him. He's averaging like 26 pass attempts per game, right? So, if it's going to be this low volume passing offense, it's going to pull all of these pass catchers down with him.
So I'm going to take your last statement there because I agree with you. And Robert in our chat has another question. Do you like the Lions better now that Wilson is playing at QB? I'm assuming he's talking about the Lions defense. I think there's two sides to that. I do think I don't personally. I think that what you're saying, which is true, they're going to have training wheels on him. They're not going to let him throw the ball. So unless you find you're playing a situation where you think Detroit is up big in this game, which I also don't see, there's just not enough opportunity for sacks and turnovers from Zach Wilson in this game. And for an upside defense in GPP, you want a team like that that's going to be faced with tons more dropbacks than you're used to seeing, or more than the mean, so you can get those extra opportunities for sacks, turnovers, consequently defensive touchdowns, which is really the ceiling game. So I'm not really treating the Lions defense any better than I would have, really. I think here. What about you?
Yeah, it's really no change for me, right? They're fine as a punt play 3K flat. Their likelihood of generating a turnover is probably incrementally higher, but their opportunity to do so is markedly lower. So really kind of a net neutral update overall.
Yeah. So I mean, again, kind of going along these lines here too. Are you into Bam Knight again? This is all of a sudden this is a tough matchup. The Lions rush defense has been nails lately, and I mean, we could play this two ways. Are they going to lean on him because they don't want Zach Wilson to be throwing the ball? Does it matter? He's still 5,300, which is a pretty nice price, and I'm checking right now, but I think he's showing some decent rostership. Not like I kind of expected him to. I think people are wise to that matchup, but what's your take on him?
I think he's fine. Specifically from a pricing standpoint. The big litmus test with Bam Knight came last week with the return of the other Michael Carter for this Jets team, and even with him, healthy and available, we saw Bam get a season high in carries. We saw him catch a couple of passes as well, right? So, they want to get him involved in this game. I do think that he will be heavily featured. The matchup against the Detroit, rather running the ball against Detroit. From a fantasy standpoint, it's certainly not good. It's kind of bottom third of the league. They're still allowing 4.5 yards per carry. So, if we're talking about a high volume game, maybe that number pushes towards 18, 19, 20 carries at, 4.5 clip. You can pay off
Sure.
5.3 for sure.
Yeah. It's price. That's like you said, he's fine. There's nothing wrong with playing him there. All right, so yeah, it's Jets Lions. I feel like that's lost a lot of its luster lately as the week has gone on. But let's move on to another game. Kansas City at Houston. Now, this is a tricky one, too, because this is definitely the biggest mismatch of the week. It's in Houston, but the Chiefs are still 14-point favorites. However, they do have a 31.5-point team total here. So I started the week off looking mainly, which is weird because, I mean, you usually want Mahomes and whoever Mahomes is passing to. But I was looking at Isaiah Pacheco first and foremost here at 5,900. Against the Texans defense, most fantasy points per game to running backs, 5.1 yards per carry, 166 rushing yards per game. I mean, the only issue with Pacheco is he's not involved in the passing game at all, although he did have 3 targets last week. The thing that I am puzzled about is that his rostership is not high. I'm seeing it kind of in the low teens. Similar to David Montgomery, similar to Travis Etienne, less than Latavius Murray, a little bit less than Bam Knight, who we just talked about. And that one is hurting me a bit. So do you want to shed some light on that? Or are you seeing something different here?
I'm seeing something fairly similar. I'm seeing him floating around like 14.5%. I think the answer to your question is Jerick McKinnon. Everybody loves chasing last week's points, right? We saw Jerick McKinnon really explode, especially down the stretch run of that game. So, all season, everyone has been targeting this Texans matchup. They will continue to do so. But I do think there's just enough fear, uncertainty, and doubt about how Kansas City will split these carries in tomorrow's game to draw some of that rostership away from Isaiah Pacheco. If this holds serve, if this trend continues to move down, I'm going to be well overweight to the field on this. We talked earlier about some pay down running backs. Isaiah Pacheco's probably my favorite, right? Even with that big week from McKinnon last week, Isaiah Pacheco is firmly cemented as the early down runner in this offense. There should be a lot of early down running type of opportunities in this game against the Texans tomorrow. So, yeah, if he's going to be sub 20%, he's someone that I'm going to have a ton of exposure to, and will do so grinning ear to ear.
Yeah, I have him in cash right now, and like I'm feeling wrong about it because it doesn't seem like people are. I mean, when I'll do the final runs tomorrow, I could see him being touchdown dependent, but again, that doesn't bother you with players like Nick Chubb, who I'm not comparing the two, but still, it's an early down banger with a smash matchup. I think he can score. So I mean, I'll see how that goes at 5,900. For the passing game, from a cash perspective, if you can pay up, I'm into Kelsey. He's perpetually too cheap, but I don't find myself using the Chiefs' other players in cash. So I think this is more of a GPP play. Obviously Mahomes is cash playable, but at the same price as Hurts. I like Hurts better this week, with his rushing upside and the stats we gave about the Bears. So talk to me about the Chiefs in GPP. Are you going to be stacking them?
I don't know if I am. We've seen so Houston very well should have stole that game against Dallas last week. Um, if you watch that sequence towards the end of the game where they have the ball as like first and goal from the 2, they very quickly realized that they wanted the first overall draft pick and just didn't force the ball into the end zone. But if it wasn't for that call from above, Houston very likely would have won that game against Dallas. Apart from that, in their wake, these Texans games have a lot of circumstances where starters are getting pulled right at the halfway point, somewhere through the third quarter, right. So to roster some of the most expensive players on the board in a situation where there's at least a decent chance they don't see a full complement of snaps is a little bit too risky from my point of view. Also, I mean, don't look now, the Texans secondary has kind of been clamping things down lately. Juju Smith-Schuster should see Desmond King out of the slot a fair amount. Desmond King is allowing like 6 yards per catch over his last 2 or 3 games. So he's kind of been tightening things down. Stingley might make his way back to the field for this game, which would obviously make things a little bit more difficult. So, all kind of, neutral, if not slight downgrade matchups for the pass catchers not named Kelsey in Kansas City. And, the guys that are viable are carrying some pretty hefty price tags. So I'm not going to feel good about getting into the Kansas City side of this game apart from Isaiah Pacheco.
I'm kind of on the same page there, other than Kelsey. And I'll add that Kadarius Toney is still not ruled out. He's questionable. So if he does play, that just muddies that even more. On the Texans side, we've lost Dameon Pierce to IR. That I think goes along they want the number 1 pick here, and they don't need to play him anymore. But again, we have Nico Collins and Brandon Cooks out. So honestly, I didn't think I would think it of a Houston player this late in the season, but Chris Moore is the lock of locks in cash right now, too. I'll ask your opinion in GPP in a minute, because we're going to get massive rostership on him, rightfully so. He's $4,200 on DraftKings, had 11 targets last week, caught 10 of them for 124 yards. This is a game script where Houston should be throwing all day, and Kansas City is bad against wide receivers. So don't overthink this one in cash. He should probably be the first guy you enter in. Now, what about GPP? Is he cheap enough that it doesn't matter how high he's rostered?
Not exactly, right? I mean, if you need a punt play, he's fine, right? He should be able to get close to value at 4.2K. Really, the thing that's worrisome for me, the rostership, right? He's going to be maybe the most popular player on the slate. Will certainly push for the most popular wide receiver on the slate, but also his matchup is actually, his individual matchup is really tough, right? Kansas City on the whole is a pretty favorable spot for opposing wide receivers. A lot of that has to do with game script and how often teams that are facing them are needing to rely on the throw. That should obviously be the case for the Texans this week. But Chris Moore is going to see, upwards of 75% of his snaps in Trent McDuffie's coverage. Trent McDuffie is allowing a 52% catch rate on the season. Anything below 60% is really, really strong. So, to have such a popular player whose individual matchup is a pretty considerable downgrade, these are things that are going to have me moving away from him in tournament anyways, right? His ability to get to his ceiling is just significantly hampered. And just on the whole, I'm probably not going to find myself in this game a lot, right? Even for my last guys in, I want to try to find a way to correlate in one way or another. Maybe I'll put him in the rotation where I've got Isaiah Pacheco in there, but ultimately, I think that we've probably seen Chris Moore's best game already, and chasing last week's points is never really doesn't seem to work out all that often in the DFS world.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think he's someone that you need to be over the field on in GPPs. Cash, he's going to be a must. Um, but that's
He's
the
so
beauty
popular.
of
You got to
being
do it.
able to that's the beauty of being able to just follow the rostership, because even if he does bust, you're probably getting him. That's like Jonathan Taylor today. I'm well in the money in my early games in cash, because in all the double ups that I was in, he was 75 to 80% rostered. So he went down with an injury. It's going to crush you in GPPs, but I didn't need the GPPs, because I'm going to win the cash. So just don't. That's kind of one where you follow the crowd on, and just hope that he helps you enough in the GPPs. You enter it in, but that's fine in cash. So moving on, Dallas Jacksonville. Hard to know what to think of Dallas after they almost lost to Houston last week. A bit on them, first of all, is they just lost Terrence Steele, their right tackle, which is a big hit to their offensive line, but they're getting Tyron Smith back, most likely, who is actually, I didn't realize it's his season debut. I thought he came back earlier in the year and then went out again, but I guess not. He's playing for the first time in this game. So I don't know, maybe it takes him a bit to get his footing here. I'm having a tough time here. I think all of Dallas's players are good in their own right. I'm having a tough time kind of honing in on one that I like better than others. Obviously, I think Pollard is the one you're looking at the most, but his price is getting up there. 7 touchdowns over his last 5 games, and Jacksonville, I think one thing that helps Pollard a lot is Jacksonville's given up the second most catches to running backs. But Ezekiel Elliott's there and also playing well. So talk to me about the Dallas running backs. Are you on one, both, neither? What are you looking at?
Yeah, my favorite non-answer, right? I think the one that I will be more heavily featuring is the one that is less popular from a tournament
Mm-hmm.
standpoint. That's Ezekiel Elliott. Seeing him in kind of the high single-digit rostership as opposed to Pollard pushing kind of the mid-teens. This could certainly break one way or the other as we get into the morning, but a little bit of a at least a decent discount overall, and a little bit of an edge from a rostership standpoint is just enough for me to that way. And Dallas specifically, I mean, they're now up to 30 rushing attempts per game on the year. Look over the I mean, they're pushing almost 35, right? So, however you splice it, there's going to be enough opportunity for either of these guys to get there. So, I'll kind of get the incremental advantages of lower rostership and some salary relief with Elliott.
Yeah, and I'm just going back a game, by the way, because I just saw it popped up on my feed. The Texans are without Derek Stingley and Steven Nelson against KC, so
Ooh,
that is
okay.
actually a nice little upgrade to if you
Something
were
to consider.
considering
Yeah.
Chief stacks. Yeah. All right, so back to Dallas Jacksonville here. I'm with you. On those running backs. And like you said, that their rushing attack, they're winning because of that too. So I don't really see a reason as to why all of a sudden they'll come out and Dak will be throwing 50 passes and the running backs will bust. But you never know. I do think this is a GPP game more than a cash game. How about the passing game here? The Jacksonville is a solid matchup for Lamb. Um, but he had a worrisome stat line against Houston last week. Is that just a blip on the radar? He had 5 catches for 33 yards on 6 targets. Um, He did play 96% of snaps, though. So is that just a blip on the radar? Are you okay going Lamb in all formats?
Yeah, I think it's more the exception than the rule. I just finished stumping for an improving Texan secondary, so that statistically is a tougher matchup than the one that he'll face this week in Jacksonville. And if that works to draw his rostership down to the levels that I'm seeing now, pushing, 10, 11%, that all the better, right? His individual matchup this week is absolutely fantastic. So CD Lamb, always has the ability to push for top scorer at his position on any given slate. If he's going to do that, nearing single digit rostership, that's something that's always going to catch my eye.
Yeah, I agree. And on the same line, Dalton Schultz, I'm just kind of looking. He's actually looking like he's popular. I didn't expect it given his price tag. That $4,400 price tag is usually kind of enough in that mid range where people tend to want to not look that way because they want to go cheaper or more expensive to like Kelsey. But Schultz is finding himself with some rostership at 4,400. But I do think it's warranted. I mean, in week 14 against the Texans, he had 10 targets, 6 catches for 87 yards, 93% snap share. And actually a stat that here's a little trivia question for you. So since the Cowboys had a bye, Dalton Schultz is third in fantasy points per game among tight ends. Kelsey is first. Do you know who's second?
It's TJ Hawkinson, right?
Nope. Total, not on a per game basis. He is the other tight end in this game, Evan Engram, which absolutely makes me want to throw something through this window over here. But there you are. Hey Jim, thanks for joining us. We got another one of our guests in the chat. So Dalton Schultz, I like in. I will say either format. I think if you got the money for him in cash, I think he's popular enough that you can accept that extra amount of money. I'm not going there because there are some cheap guys that I like better. How about for Jacksonville? Trevor Lawrence is good all of a sudden. He's not only good, but he's looking like he's getting into that upper echelon. I don't know how bad a coach Urban Meyer had to have been to break him the way that he did, but Trevor Lawrence looks to be in good shape heading into next year. I mean, they're not making the playoffs this year, but I think Jacksonville looks like a team to keep an eye on in next year and years to come. However, they get to play Dallas, who has given up the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, highest pass rush rate in the NFL, and the highest sack rate in the NFL. So let's talk. I'll give you the Jacksonville passing game as a whole. I'm not using any of them in cash. So where are you on a GPP standpoint?
Yeah, I think he's in the mix. I kind of like targeting this game overall. Trevor Lawrence is coming in off of 4 QB1 performances in his last 5 games. Just narrowly missed that in the 5th against Detroit. So things really look to have turned around coming out of that London game. He's doing a lot better job of taking care of the ball. He's not making some of those kind of cross his body, cross the field throws that he was sort of mired by in the first season and a half or so of his career. And I think this is a game where Jacksonville is going to need to score to try to keep pace. So don't mind getting some Trevor Lawrence in there. In situations where I'm looking to stack this game up. Maybe not exactly his ceiling performance out there, but save a little bit of money getting to 6K flat. Because he's at that flat price point, he's probably not going to be particularly popular. Excuse me. And I think that there are some individual matchups among his receivers that can be taken advantage of. So, definitely in range in terms of kind of the ways that I can get to a quarterback like him.
Awesome. And we got about 20-ish minutes left here, and we got the 4 late games to discuss, so we'll get to it in a second. But I do think it's important to talk about Travis Etienne as well here. He's all the way down to 6,000, but a big reason for that is that over the last 4 games, he is averaging 3.1 yards per carry and only has 6 catches in those 4 games. And 2 of them he has 0. So are you worried about ETN here? Is he cheap enough for you to play? I'm personally staying away. I love the price tag here, but I find myself once I'm there just saying, well, I just like Pacheco at 5,900 so much better, or or I'll just pay that extra couple hundred for Ezekiel Elliott, who you mentioned already, or I'll drop, pay a little bit more for some of the guys in the late games that we haven't discussed yet, like Kamara. He's just not making the cut for me. What about you?
Yeah, it's really hard to get there, specifically with how uninvolved he's been as a pass catcher, right? You mentioned that 4 game stretch that's following the point where he's really been presumably hampered by that foot injury. For a while, ETN felt like he was fantasy gold, where regardless of game script, he was going to have a role to play. But if he's not catching the ball much, if he's going to be as we've seen in recent weeks, it's hard to pay that 6K total. I do think they're going to try to feature him a bit more, right? Like I think part of their game plan will be a bit more running to open the game, but a bit more running at roughly 3 yards a clip isn't really going to net you much from a DFS standpoint.
Yeah, I agree, and I think to your point, it's fair to wonder if his it's just caught up with him. Essentially this is his rookie year. I mean, he missed the whole season,
right.
So he might, there's wear and tear. He might be just hitting the rookie wall here. I'm not worried long term, but yeah, he's not someone I'm excited to play tomorrow. So let's move on a little bit to the Denver Arizona game, which at the beginning of the year probably looked like it was going to be a pretty fun one. But we have an over-under of 37 points in a game that is going to be Brett Rippon against Colt McCoy. So I'm going to I'll keep it simple from a cash standpoint. I am very interested in James Conner in this game at 6,900. He last week played 71 out of 75 possible snaps. I don't think losing Kyler Murray impacts him. Denver is a much better pass defense than they are a rush defense. They've given up 4.6 yards per carry and almost 6 catches per game to opposing running backs. So my one bugaboo here is of playing him in cash is that the chalk defense by far is Denver, and rightfully so. So I'll kind of keep it right there. Are you okay playing Connor and the Denver defense, or would you restrict yourself to picking one if you're playing this?
I'd rather have one or the other, but I don't think it's a zero sum game, right? Like there are worlds, plenty of outcomes on the range where Connor can pay off and get to value, and Denver's defense can have a solid game, right? Like we talk about it a lot when we discuss strategy for defenses in DFS. A lot of it is about generating turnovers and trying to generate defensive touchdowns based on those turnovers. There's still ample opportunity to do that with Colt McCoy under center for this Denver secondary in a world where James Conner is going to see 95% of snaps and all the carries that he can handle, right? So I don't think you have to kind of decouple those, but in the general sense, I usually don't like paying up for a running back going against the defense that I'm also rostering.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I might do it, I might not. The beauty of that is if you're not playing both, Alvin Kamara, who we mentioned earlier, is $100 cheaper than Connor, and I don't think one is a significantly better play than the other. So if you don't like doing that, I would say just go to Kamara there and keep the Denver defense rather than get kind of cute with that defense there. The other play for cash that I do like a lot in this game is Greg Dulcich, although I screwed that up last week. I liked Chigakonkwo a lot better at 700 cheaper, and I talked myself into following the ownership there with Dulcich and lost that battle. But Dulcich is he does have 8 targets in back-to-back weeks, and we have attacked the Arizona defense with tight ends all season, you and I. So I still think that I'm going to take the cheaper Okonkwo of the two, but it does look like Dulcich is currently the highest rostered tight end. Oh, no, he's not anymore. He has fallen below Chig, so I feel even a little bit better than that now. But you can play Dulcich at 3,600 there for sure. Anyone else in this game that you're interested in?
I mean, if you're looking to pay down or if you're looking to punt, Latavius Murray at 5.1K should have all the workload that he can handle. I'm not too concerned about Marlon Mack's annual blip onto the radar. His upside is always going to be limited in this Denver
Didn't he have a long
offense,
receiving touchdown last week?
Yeah, he did.
A jerk. Keep going.
I mean, it's just 1 week every single year. He's gonna do this to us, right? I think I think it was last week. So, hopefully that's behind us. But we should see another game where Denver should be able to stay in it and won't have to abandon the run. If that's the case, another solid kind of mid-teens of workload at 5.1K. You can make a case for it. You're not going to feel excited about it.
Yep, I agree. Not an exciting game as a whole, but there are some cash plays in there, like I mentioned, to really fill your lineup in. All right, moving on. We got about 10 minutes left here. We got New England at Las Vegas, and this is one. I don't know how much we can say about this one right now because this still depends on the injury report. I mean, that's everything in this game. Earlier in the week, I wrote about Nelson Aguilar as the top value overall of the week, just because he got 10 targets. The injury report being so long, especially on the wide receiver side, but it does look like Jacoby Myers is back. So I don't think that takes Aguilar off the radar, but it does for me in cash. Jacoby Myers himself, though, is 4,700, and if he is running as the lead receiver with no inhibitions, without Devontae Parker, who is out with a concussion, I think that's a nice spot to go for value then in cash. He's 4,700 as opposed to the really nice value we had with Aguilar at 3,400. But I think that's one you can take on in cash. And then the running backs, Damian Harris is out. We still don't know about Ramondre Stevenson. How are you treating this game as it is now? Assume Ramondre is out. What are you going to do with this? I think he's going to be.
Yeah, it would seem that he's breaking that direction. If that's the case, it's probably kind of a running back situation to avoid overall. At that point, we're going to see some combination of Harris and Strong in that backfield. Strong looked dynamic on that touchdown that he scored. He's one of the fastest players measured this year, so obviously that's to be expected. Harris outsnapped him 28-18. So the point being the kind of mired New England timeshare of a backfield will be in full force if we see Ramondre Stevenson ruled out for this game. So, not really going to go out of my way to get onto either of the New England running backs. I guess I would err on the side of Harris, just given that he saw more volume last week, but they're both going to be hampered.
Yeah, this will be this is one that needs to take shape here because I assume we'll see roster shift from these guys given the fact that they're the minimum price for running backs. I can't bring myself to do that yet, just because you really don't need to. I mean, there's value elsewhere on this slate that is a little bit more taking shape. I mean, I assume also that they'll bring up J.J. Taylor from the practice squad for some more depth, and you just don't know. Especially Belichick. He's death to fantasy running backs. I mean, Ramondre Stevenson is the most predictable guy the last few weeks that I can remember in ages for the Patriots running backs. But so I don't think I'd go there. How about the other side of this, the Raiders? It looks like we're getting Darren Waller and Hunter Renfrow back. So does that mess around enough that you're gonna stay away from the passing game, or you like Devontae Adams? Jack Jones looks like he's gonna miss, which really helps Adams.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it moves the needle enough to where Renfro or Waller should be rostered immediately, right? That matchup individually that Adams pulls this week, if in fact Jack Jones is out, only saying that, or whomever is playing behind Jack Jones, who's a pretty favorable matchup as he is, is now all the better for Adams. I would like to see the availability of some of the other pass catchers draw Devontae Adams' rostership down a bit further, but if he's sub 10%, he's such a great way to get leverage on the field that he'll be in the pool for me.
Yeah, I agree too. What about Josh Jacobs? I mean, he is. I was on him again. This is my biggest win of the preseason, that I was heavily on Jacobs. But I mean, I never expected the fact that he'd be pushing to be in the conversation for the RB1 overall. I was happy with top 10 upside, even top 7, 8 upside. So right now he is showing, I'm just checking right now, I think he's coming in as one of the highest rostered backs. I'm seeing that he's a top 3 rostered running back, even though he is flirting with the others as being one of the most expensive ones on the slate. But I mean, you gotta be strongly considering him anyway, right? I mean, he's had 52 carries in his last 2 weeks, and they're back in it now. Are they back in it now, or is they just kind of still too far out of it? I know they've been winning, but the Chargers beat them, so that kind of put a damper on things, right?
Yeah, I think they were technically still on the graphic earlier today. Maybe that Browns win actually just squeezed them out there. They're sitting at 5-8 on the season, coming off of that horrendous Rams loss. So I think it's just about a closed door for them.
Oh, that's right. Baker Mayfield crushed them. All right. So I mean, I don't think that impedes Jacobs enough. How are you treating Jacobs on this slate? We got about 5 minutes left to go. I want to get to one more game.
Yeah, it's going to be hard for me to get to Jacobs. 8.1K, one of the most popular runners on the slate, and this running back or this run defense for New England is insane. Second fewest fantasy points allowed to the position, 3.8 yards per carry. They've only given up 3 rushing scores on the season, right? So all these things are working against Jacobs as it is. And there are just a couple of guys in that tier of player that I would be much more excited about rostering than Jacobs in a very difficult spot.
Yeah, I mean, I love that workload floor for Jacobs, but like you said, and we'll segue into it. Like Derrick Henry is $100 less. I just can't see doing it for Jacobs, as much as I love the guy and as much as he warrants his price tag. So let's finish up with that game here. Tennessee and the Chargers. This looks like it might be one of the more fun ones and one of the most fantasy relevant. We probably should have started with this one, or at least done it earlier. Make sure we cover it. But, let's get to as many of these plays as we can. So I mentioned Henry. So let's talk about him first and foremost. 5.5 yards per carry allowed by the Chargers, 4th most fantasy points per game. Dontrell Hilliard is out, which may enhance Henry's passing game even. He is someone that I'm probably paying for in cash. How are you treating him in GPP?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think he should be considered very favorably a priority in cash, and GPP is as well, right? I mean, he was fine overall last week, but if you look at the early onset of that game against Jacksonville, it looked like Derrick Henry was en route for a 200, 250 yard type of performance on the ground, right? And Jacksonville was able to kind of clamp things down to shift the game script over towards more of a throwing circumstance. But with Hilliard out, I mean, Henry saw 5 targets last week. If he does that again, he can easily get back into the top 5, even in kind of an anti-Derrick Henry game script.
Yeah, I agree. I agree for sure. So I'm glad we're on the same page with Henry, and he did lose a critical fumble in that game too. But I don't think he's not the type of running back that loses a role because of that. We know what Henry is. The other one I want to talk about is Chig. We mentioned in the passing game. He's still running fewer routes than Austin Hooper, but he's got 16 targets over the last 3 games, and he's being looked at in the red zone. He now looks like he is vying for the most rostered tight end on this 3,100. He's more than likely going to be my cash tight end. What are you doing with him?
Yeah, I mean he's got to be out there, right? Like the way that his tag first and foremost, it's going to have on the radar, right? Even if he's kind of on the wrong side of a split with Hooper, the way that they use him in this offense in general, but also specifically the way that they use him with Treylon Burks not available. Chig right now is sitting at number 7 in the league in his position at 8.7 average target distance as ADOT is super high, right? He's just one of these raw athletic kind of above the rim tight ends that they love pushing the ball down the field to. He's number 1 in the league in yards per reception at 15.2 yards. So, a catch or 2 can very easily pay off 3.1K. And obviously they like to go to him in high leverage spots. So he's got a good amount of upside to go with it.
Yep, love it. And a little break here. Waddle just scored a 67-yard touchdown from Tua, and I don't know if they're going to kick or go for 2, but they failed the 2-point conversion. So it's 21-19 Bills, but Waddle with a 67-yard touchdown there. I have him in a couple of showdown lineups. Is he in your stack there that you were mentioning?
Ooh. Or one of them? I have myself a sweat. Yes.
Ooh, nice. All right, nice. I'll be following that as the night. Make sure you text me that one. All right, so we got a couple minutes. I'm heading over to SiriusXM Fantasy to join the football diehards there in a minute. But I do want, before we get to that, I'll kind of let you do it. I'll let you close this out here because the Chargers, I love them all. Herbert is in consideration for cash. Both wide receivers. Eckler is always in consideration. This Tennessee defense is becoming the Detroit defense that we've targeted through the passing game all year. They are a complete pass funnel, and this Chargers offense is healthy and firing on all cylinders. So why don't you close this out with how you're approaching this Chargers team, because I like them all. maybe you can kind of give us some direction here.
I mean, I don't know if I'm going to give better direction than I also like them all. I might have a lot of Charger stacks, rolling out there. We saw Mike Williams, really have that type of ceiling performance that we all know that he's capable of last week. Even with that being the case, as he turns in 24-point effort, 6 receptions, a touchdown, 116 yards. Keenan Allen has been absolutely setting the world on fire. 28 targets over his last 2 games. Back to that elite volume that we know from Keenan Allen of old. So, where I'm forced to make the decision, I'll probably follow rostership. But, if we talk about a world where you can potentially get Herbert and Allen and Williams together with Derrick Henry or Chigakonkwo run back, that's a texture that I like a lot. Also, keep in mind with Tennessee being a pass funnel as it is, I think they've already ruled out like 6 or 7 of their starting defensive players for tomorrow as well. So they're going to be super shorthanded. It is wheels up for what should be an offensive explosion for the Chargers.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of put the cash bow on that I think you need exposure to it in cash. I mean, I'm good with them all. I'm good. I'm good with any piece of this game you play in cash. Just have some of that because this is like I think this is the top offense that you want to target. I apologize. We should have started with that, but I'm being sent the link to to the next thing there. We'll kind of go over that a little bit better as we do next week. So thank you all for joining us and all the questions that you pose. I'm going to sign us off now, and we'll see you back here Christmas Eve. So we'll talk about it. Probably going to wind up being before that, obviously, because Christmas Eve football is on Saturday. So we'll be coming to you before that at some point. Again, follow us both, JAC3600, Eric at Fantasy Nav, and we will see you again next week. And thank you again for tuning in.